The Star Runner carved through the cosmic darkness like a wounded predator. Its titanium hull, bearing the scars of countless battles fought in humanity's name. But today wasn't humanity's fight. Today, Dr. Rebecca Martinez was just watching two alien civilizations tear each other apart in the most spectacular light show the galaxy had ever witnessed. Plasma bolts erupted between the massive warships, like deadly fireworks painted against the star-filled canvas of space. Each explosion wasn't just pretty colors, it was another crew vaporized, another family somewhere receiving news that would shatter their world. The irony wasn't lost on Rebecca that she was documenting death while floating safely behind reinforced barriers. My God, she whispered, her breath creating ghostly patterns on the transparent aluminum viewport. The hegemony's bioships moved through the Altarian fleet like sharks through a school of fish, their weapons tearing through shields as if they were tissue paper. The energy discharge patterns are absolutely incredible. Look at those weapon configurations. Her excitement was genuine, almost childlike. After all, how many humans get to witness their first interstellar war? It was like being the first person to see fire or watch lightning split the sky. This was history in the making. She had front row seats. Captain James Mitchell of the Altarian Defense Force shot her a look that could melt steel. His reptilian features twisted into something between disgust and disbelief. Dr. Weir, getting our scales handed to us out there? Maybe save the scientific wonder for when we're not about to become space dust? You know that feeling when you're so absorbed in something fascinating that the world around you disappears? That was Rebecca. For 6 months, she'd been the only human aboard this alien warship, living among creatures that looked like they stepped out of Earth's most creative science fiction movies. The Terran Federation had given her the assignment of a lifetime document. Humanity's first glimpse of real interstellar warfare. Be neutral. Be invisible. Stay out of the way. Simple enough, right? It's wrong. The ship lurched violently as enemy fire punched through their defensive barriers like a hammer through glass. Emergency alarms shrieked through the corridors, bathing everything in hellish crimson light that made everyone look like demons. The smell of burning circuits and ozone filled the air. Shields down to 30%. Lieutenant Commander Anderson's voice cut through the chaos. He was the only other human aboard, military liaison who'd spent the past 6 months looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the universe. We can't take much more punishment. Rebecca's heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. Desperate to escape, fear and excitement wrestled in her chest. The primal terror of facing death mixed with the intoxicating thrill of witnessing something no human had ever seen. The hegemony ships moved with an elegance that defied their destructive purpose. Their obsidian hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that seemed almost hypnotic. But here's what made her blood run cold. These weren't individual ships fighting. Their own battles. They moved like fingers on the same hand, like neurons in the same brain. Every maneuver was perfectly coordinated, every attack precisely timed. It was beautiful and terrifying, like watching a hurricane or a volcano erupt. "Sir, incoming transmission from the Hegemony flagship," the communications officer announced, his scaled hands dancing across alien interfaces that glowed with soft blue light. Captain Mitchell's golden eyes narrowed to slits. The muscles in his jaw worked silently for a moment before he spoke. "Put it through. Let's hear what these parasites want now." The main screen flickered like an old television finding. Its signal then crystallized into something that would haunt Rebecca's dreams for years to come. The interior of the Hegemony vessel looked wrong on every level, too organic, too alive, like being inside the belly of some cosmic beast. At the center of this nightmare stood a creature that redefined Rebecca's understanding of the word. Alien. Tall as a basketball player, but impossibly thin, with chitinous armor that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. Multiple arms sprouted from its torso, each ending in delicate manipulator appendages that moved with spider-like precision. But the eyes, dear God, the eyes. Hundreds of them dotted its head and shoulders like black pearls, each one moving independently, tracking different objects, processing multiple streams of information simultaneously. It was like staring into the face of a living surveillance system. I am War Commander, Vex of the Hegemony. The creature spoke through a translation matrix that somehow made its alien vocalizations sound almost human. Almost. Surrender now, Captain Mitchell, and your crews will be granted the mercy of quick death instead of slow assimilation. Rebecca found herself leaning forward despite every instinct screaming at her to run. Her scientific mind was already cataloging details, noting biosignatures that matched nothing in humanity's xenobiology databases. The bone structure suggested a hive mind species, but the neural complexity readings were off the charts. This wasn't just collective intelligence. This was something far more sophisticated and infinitely more dangerous. Never, Captain Mitchell replied, his voice carrying the kind of cold dignity that comes from facing certain death with honor intact. Altarian Defense Force doesn't surrender to parasites like you. And that's when everything changed. Every single one of Vex's hundreds of eyes suddenly snapped toward the camera like compass needles finding magnetic north. The creature's posture shifted in a way that made Rebecca's skin crawl, not the fluid movement of a predator, but the frozen stillness of something that had just encountered the impossible. Wait, Vex whispered, and even through the translation matrix, Rebecca could hear something that sounded suspiciously like fear creeping into its voice. There is another present, a new pattern in the quantum field. What species observes this engagement? Time seemed to slow as Rebecca felt every eye on the bridge turned toward her. The weight of their collective gaze pressed down like a physical force. Her mouth went dry, her palms slick with sweat, but she stepped forward anyway. Because sometimes history chooses you whether you're ready or not. I'm Dr. Rebecca Martinez of the Terran Federation, she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. I'm here as a neutral observer under the Galactic Accords. The silence that followed was the kind that makes you question whether time itself has stopped. On the screen, every one of Vex's hundreds of eyes had focused on her with an intensity that made her feel like a bug under a microscope. Human, the creature breathed, and in that single word, Rebecca heard something that chilled her to the bone. Pure, undiluted terror. But wait, why would an advanced alien species that was currently winning a space battle be afraid of one unarmed human scientist? What could humanity possibly represent to a civilization that had mastered interstellar warfare and biological enhancement? The answer to that question would change everything Rebecca thought she knew about her species, her universe, and humanity's place in the cosmic order. Because sometimes, being just an observer isn't enough to keep you safe from the truth. If you're fascinated by how small changes can lead to massive transformations, just like Rebecca's simple presence completely altered an entire galactic conflictual, love our next video about the incredible power of compounding and how tiny daily actions can reshape your entire life. Click the end screen to discover how this universal principle can work for you. The silence that crashed over the Hegemony Bridge was the kind that makes your ears ring. You know that moment when someone drops a bombshell so massive that even the air seems afraid to move? That's what happened when Vex, this terrifying alien war commander with hundreds of eyes, heard the word human and froze like someone had just shown him his own death certificate. The chittering of nervous mandibles from Vex's crew was the only sound breaking the cosmic quiet. Imagine a room full of giant insects having anxiety attacks and you're getting close. But Vex himself remained motionless, every single one of his eyes locked onto Rebecca through the transmission screen with the intensity of a laser beam. Human, he repeated. And this time Rebecca caught something that made her blood turn to ice water. It wasn't just fear in that translated voice. It was the kind of horrified recognition you'd have if you walked into your basement and found a saber-toothed tiger casually reading your newspaper. Captain Mitchell stepped closer to Rebecca, reptilian features twisted with confusion and growing alarm. Doctor, is there something about human contact with the hegemony you conveniently forgot to mention in your mission briefing? Rebecca shook her head so hard her hair whipped around. Her face, the confusion racing through her mind, felt like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle while riding a roller coaster. This is supposed to be first contact, Captain. I've never seen this species before in my life. Hell, I've never even seen a picture of them in any xenobiology database. But here's where things got really weird and, trust me when you're all ready, dealing with insectoid aliens in the middle of a space battle, really weird is saying something. As Rebecca spoke, She started noticing details that made her skin crawl like ants were marching up her spine. Vex's secondary limbs were trembling like leaves in a hurricane. The ambient lighting throughout the hegemony ship was shifting from cool blue to warning amber, as if the entire vessel was having an emotional breakdown. Most disturbing of all, those hundreds of eyes weren't just looking at her, they were studying her. With the clinical intensity of a scientist examining a specimen that shouldn't exist. Impossible, Vex murmured, and even through the alien translation. Matrix. Rebecca could hear something that sounded suspiciously like a death rattle. The record spoke of total extinction. The Great Purge was supposed to be absolute, complete, final. Now, if someone just told you that your entire species was supposed to be extinct, what would your first question be? Rebecca stepped toward the camera with the kind of determination that comes from being absolutely terrified, but too curious to back down. What purge? She demanded. What the hell are you talking about? The alien's head tilted in a motion that was utterly foreign yet somehow familiar, like watching a cat move. Mutt. If the cat was the size of a refrigerator and had more eyes than a potato, you do not know. Of course you do not know. Mortal memory is so brief, so tragically fragile. Captain Mitchell's patience finally snapped like a rubber band stretched too far. His voice carried the kind of authority that comes from commanding warships in life-or-death situations. It's enough with the cryptic riddles. If you have some ancient grudge against humanity, that's not the Altarian Defense Force's problem. Business is with each other, not some human scientist. But Vex's attention never wavered from Rebecca. It was like she'd become the only person in the universe worth looking at. Tell me, human observer, what do you know of your species' earliest? Ventures into the void? Your first attempts to plant colonies beyond your birth world? Rebecca frowned, her scientific mind automatically cataloging information, even as fear gnawed at her gut. Standard galactic history puts humanity's first faster-than-light travel at roughly 200 years ago. We've been expanding slowly. Since then, making peaceful contact with various species, establishing trade relationships, that sort of thing. 200 years, Vex repeated. And Rebecca swore she could hear something that might have been bitter amusement, like someone laughing at a joke that was also a funeral. Such a pathetically brief span of awareness. Tell me, Dr. Martinez, do your people still remember the generation ships? The massive slower-than-light colony vessels that came before your faster-than-light breakthrough? The question hit Rebecca. Like a puzzle piece clicking into place, except the picture it was forming made no sense. There are some historical records, yes. Archaeological evidence suggests several ambitious attempts at interstellar colonization using sublight vessels. But most of those efforts are considered failures. The ships were lost in transit, or the colonies couldn't sustain viable populations. Lost, Vex echoed, and the way he said it made Rebecca think of graveyards and broken promises. Yes, they were lost. But not in the way your sanitized history books would have you believe. Have you ever been in a room where everyone suddenly stops talking at once? The bridge around Vex had grown eerily quiet. Rebecca could see other creatures moving in the background, workers, soldiers, technicians, but they were all giving their commander a wide berth, as if they were afraid that interrupting this conversation might get them vaporized. Dr. Martinez, Captain Mitchell said urgently, his voice carrying the kind of warning you hear right before something very bad happens. Perhaps we should discontinue this transmission. And no, Rebecca interrupted, her scientific curiosity overriding every survival instinct screaming in her head. I want to hear this. War Commander Vex, what really happened to humanity's early colonies? The alien's posture shifted in a way that made Rebecca's heart skip several beats. What she was seeing was grief impossible, inexplicable grief from a creature that should have had no emotional connection to humanity whatsoever. It was like watching a stranger cry at your grandfather's funeral. They were magnificent, Vex said softly, his voice carrying the weight of someone confessing to murder. The first humans to reach the deep void between stars, they carried such hope, such unbreakable determination. They built shining cities on 23 worlds across 6 different sectors. They cultivated gardens in alien soil, raised children who knew only the light of foreign suns. Rebecca felt her heart stop beating. For several terrifying seconds, that's impossible. Our deep space surveys have never found evidence of such extensive human colonization. Of course not, Vex replied, and his voice carried the finality of a closing tomb. We were very, very thorough in our work. Words hit Rebecca like a physical blow to the chest. Round her, she heard the sharp intake of breath from the Altarian bridge crew as the full implication of Vex's admission sank in. You destroyed them, Rebecca whispered, the words barely audible. You committed genocide against human colonies. We followed the directive, Vex said without a trace of apology, like someone reciting a grocery list. When the ancients departed this galaxy, they left behind very clear, very specific instructions. Certain species were to be guided toward enlightenment. Others were to be contained within acceptable boundaries. And some. He paused, hundreds of eyes blinking in complex patterns that looked almost like code. Some were to be eliminated, entirely before they could mature. Rebecca's mind reeled like a computer trying to process impossible data. What ancients? What directive? Why would anyone order the complete extinction of human colonies? But even as she asked the question, something made her blood freeze in her veins. The space battle that had been raging around them was slowing down. Hegemony ships that had been methodically tearing through Altarian vessels were pulling back, their weapons fire gradually ceasing. Captain Mitchell noticed it too. All ships, immediate status report. Sir, the communications officer replied, his voice thick with confusion. The hegemony forces are withdrawing to minimum engagement range. They're maintaining battle formation, but have completely stopped. Firing. Rebecca looked at the tactical display showing the shift in battle positions. Okay. Then back at Vex's hundreds of eyes staring at her. Why are you stopping the attack? The creature's response was barely audible, like someone speaking from the bottom of a grave. Because if even one human survived the Great Purge, if your species somehow managed to return to the void despite our most thorough efforts, then perhaps the ancients' deepest fears were justified. Perhaps the directive was absolutely necessary. And perhaps his voice took on a tone of reverent terror that made Rebecca's skin crawl. Perhaps it is already too late to stop what comes next. The transmission cut out abruptly, leaving the bridge bathed in the cold glow of emergency lighting and stunned silence. Rebecca stared at the blank screen, her mind racing through implications that seemed to rewrite everything she thought she knew about humanity's place in the universe. But here's what really terrified her. The look in Vex's eyes during those final words. It was the look of something that had just realized it might have accidentally awakened. What should have remained sleeping forever. If you're fascinated by how hidden connections from the past can completely transform our understanding of the present, just like Rebecca discovering humanity's secret history, you'll love our next video about the power of compounding and how small, forgotten actions can create massive changes over time. Click the end screen to discover how this principle shapes everything around us. The Star Runner had become a ghost ship, drifting through the cosmic graveyard of twisted metal and vaporized dreams that marked where two civilizations had been trying to destroy each other just hours before. Running on minimal power to avoid detection, the vessel moved like a wounded animal seeking shelter, while inside its corridors, intelligence teams worked with the desperate intensity of archaeologists trying to decode the end of the world. Rebecca could feel the weight of every stare as she moved through the ship's passages. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and everyone stops talking? Multiply that by 1,000. Add the fact that you're surrounded by aliens who think your species might be responsible for galactic genocide. And you're getting close to what Rebecca was experiencing. Whispered conversations died as she passed. Replaced by the kind of suspicious silence that makes your skin crawl, she found refuge in the ship's archive section. Cramped technological cave filled with crystalline data cores that hummed with stored knowledge and quantum storage devices. That looked like they could hold the memories of entire civilizations. The air smelled of ozone and something that might have been fear-induced sweat from a dozen different species. Keeper Nara, the ship's elderly record keeper, had scales that shimmered like oil on water and fingers that moved across glowing interfaces. With the practiced grace of a concert pianist, what surprised Rebecca was how genuinely helpful this alien librarian had been, almost as if she understood that sometimes the truth is more important than politics or species loyalty. The records you seek are ancient beyond measure, Nara said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent decades swimming through oceans of forgotten history. Most civilizations prefer to forget the time of silence. It's easier to pretend it never happened than to face what it really means. Rebecca leaned forward, studying holographic displays that materialized around them like three-dimensional ghosts. What exactly was the time of silence? The question hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Nara's golden eyes so different from human eyes, yet somehow conveying the same deep sadness, met Rebecca's with the gravity of someone about to reveal a cosmic secret. A period roughly 3,000 years ago, when entire sectors of the galaxy simply went dark. We're talking about thriving civilizations that had been expanding, trading, building, creating, and then they just ... stopped. No communications, no interstellar commerce, no exploration. It lasted nearly 4 centuries, and it happened so gradually that most people didn't even notice until it was too late. The holographic display shifted, showing a three-dimensional map of the galaxy that made Rebecca's blood run cold. Vast regions were marked in ominous red, like infected wounds spreading across the cosmic body. She could see the pattern: now dozens of star systems abandoned, their colonies left to decay into cosmic ghost towns. The official records, Nara continued manipulating the display with movements that seemed almost like a dance, claim it was voluntary isolation. Species choosing to withdraw from galactic society for internal development, spiritual growth, that sort of sanitized nonsense. But there were always whispers among the survivors. Rebecca asked, though part of her already dreaded the answer. Nara's expression shifted into something that might have been the alien equivalent of a grimace. That something was hunting, not just raiding or conquering, systematically eliminating entire species with the efficiency of a cosmic extermination service. The few survivors who escaped called their hunters the shepherds. The word hit Rebecca like ice water in her veins. The hegemony? Perhaps they were part of it, or perhaps they were simply another tool in someone else's arsenal. Nara's fingers danced across the interface, focusing the display on star systems. Near the galactic core? But here's where it gets really interesting. And by interesting, I mean absolutely terrifying. There are references scattered throughout dozens of different archives to something called the Directive of Containment. Instructions left behind by beings so technologically advanced that the species who encountered them considered them gods. The display shifted again, showing fragmentary text in what looked like dozens of different languages and writing systems. Rebecca could make out references to the ancients, the Great Culling, and something that made her heart skip a beat. Resurrection Protocol. Can you translate any of this? Rebecca asked, her scientific mind racing even as existential dread crept up her spine. Some of it. The languages are archaic, older than most current civilizations, but the underlying patterns are remarkably consistent across multiple species records. Nara highlighted several passages that glowed with soft amber light. They all speak of a species that was deemed too dangerous to be allowed to reach technological maturity, species that showed unmistakable signs of what the texts call evolutionary inevitability. Rebecca's pulse quickened like a drumbeat before battle. What the hell does evolutionary inevitability mean? That's the million-credit question, isn't it? The texts don't explain the specifics, but the consequences were crystal clear. Any species exhibiting these mysterious traits was to be eliminated. Before they could achieve faster-than-light travel, the shepherds were created specifically to enforce this directive. The pieces of this cosmic puzzle were clicking together in Rebecca's mind with the horrible clarity of a revelation she wished she could unlearn. The human colonies. They were detected and destroyed before they could establish permanent footholds. In space, it certainly appears that way. But Doctor, there's something else that should be impossible. Nara adjusted the display once more, showing what looked like a timeline spanning millennia. According to these records, the shepherds were officially deactivated approximately 600 years ago. The directive was considered complete. Mission accomplished. Threat eliminated. Rebecca stared at the data, feeling reality tilt sideways. But humanity survived. We developed faster-than-light travel independently and came back to the stars. Exactly. That should be absolutely impossible if the directive was still active and the shepherds were still doing their job. Nara's voice carried the kind of deep concern usually reserved for discussing terminal diagnoses. Which means either the shepherds catastrophically failed in their mission, or ... or what? Rebecca whispered, though she was beginning to suspect. The answer would rewrite everything she thought she knew about her species. Or humanity represents something the ancients never anticipated, something genuinely new in the galaxy's evolutionary equation. The archive's communication system crackled to life with the electronic bark of an emergency transmission.
Captain.
Mitchell's voice cut through the technological whispers, like a sword through silk. Martinez, report to the bridge immediately. We're receiving another transmission from the Hegemony flagship, and War Commander Vex specifically requested to speak with you. Rebecca exchanged a glance with Nara that carried the weight of shared dread, then rushed through the ship's corridors toward whatever revelation was waiting for her. The bridge felt different, now charged with an energy that made the air itself seem to vibrate with anticipation. The main display flickered to life, showing Vex's insectoid form against the organic backdrop of the Hegemony vessel. But something had changed in the alien commander's posture. Where before there had been shock and fear, now there was something that looked almost like resignation mixed with scientific fascination. Dr. Martinez, the creature said as she approached the camera, hundreds of eyes tracking her movement with mechanical precision. I have spent the past several hours consulting our deepest archives, the complete records of the Great Purge. Rebecca straightened her shoulders, feeling the weight of history pressing down on her. I've been doing some research myself, War Commander. I think it's time you told me everything about the ancients. Vex's hundreds of eyes blinked in what she was learning to recognize as surprise. You are a remarkably quick study, Dr. Martinez. Very well. Yes, the ancients. The first ones, they walked among the stars when most species were still discovering how to make fire without burning down their own forests. They shaped galactic evolution, guided the development of countless civilizations, and prevented catastrophes that would have ended all intelligent life. And they ordered the complete extinction of humanity, Rebecca said, her voice carrying steel. They ordered the extinction of humanity itself, Vex corrected with the precision of someone quoting scripture. Every single member of your species, down to the last infant. The directive was absolute, comprehensive, and final. Rebecca felt fury rising in her chest like molten lava. Why? What possible justification could there be for genociding an entire species? You existed, Vex replied with devastating simplicity. Your species exhibited evolutionary patterns that the ancients had encountered before. Patterns that, throughout galactic history, had always led to the same inevitable conclusion. The bridge fell silent, except for the soft hum of life support systems. Rebecca could feel everyone holding their breath, waiting for the answer that would explain why humanity had been marked for extinction by godlike beings from the dawn of galactic civilization, but that answer would challenge everything. Rebecca thought she knew about her species' place in the universe, reveal a truth so staggering that it would change the course of galactic history forever. If you're intrigued by how patterns from the distant past can suddenly emerge too, reshape everything we thought we knew about the present. You'll be fascinated by our next video about the power of compounding and how ancient principles continue to influence our lives in ways we never imagined. Click the end screen to discover these hidden connections. The silence that crashed over the bridge after Vex's revelation wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of oppressive, suffocating silence that makes you feel like the universe itself is holding its breath. Rebecca could hear everything with supernatural clarity, her own heartbeat thundering like a war drum. The whisper of recycled air through ventilation systems, the distant hum of the reactor that kept them all alive in the cosmic void. But underneath all those familiar sounds, she sensed something else entirely. Something that hadn't been there moments before. As if their conversation about ancient genocides and cosmic directives had somehow awakened a presence that had been sleeping in the deepest corners of her mind for her entire life. Dr. Martinez, Captain Mitchell said, with the careful tone of someone trying not to startle a wild animal.
What exactly are you feeling right now?
Rebecca turned to face him.
Genuinely confused by the question. I'm not sure, Captain. You ask? His reptilian features had gone pale, and when he spoke, his voice was tight with barely controlled terror. Because you're glowing like a human-shaped star, and it's getting brighter by the second. Rebecca looked down at her hands and felt her world tilt sideways. Faint luminescence was pulsing from her skin in perfect rhythm with her heartbeat, creating patterns of light that seemed to dance just beneath the surface. The glow was warm and oddly comforting, like sunlight filtered through amber. But she could see the raw fear it was inspiring in every face around her. "This is completely impossible," she whispered. But even as the words left her mouth, she felt something stirring in her consciousness memories that belonged to someone else. Knowledge that came from places beyond individual experience, understanding. That felt older than human civilization itself. On the main display, every single one of Vex's hundreds of eyes was tracking the phenomenon with the kind of fascination, usually reserved for watching nuclear explosions in slow motion. "The awakening begins," the alien said, its translated voice carrying reverent awe. "Genetic locks are opening. Dormant neural pathways that have been sleeping for millennia are finally activating." "What the hell is happening to me?" Rebecca demanded. But even as she asked the question, understanding was already flooding through her mind like water through a broken dam. The glow was spreading up her arms now, bringing with it sensations that had no names in any human language. She could feel quantum fluctuations in the ship's hull, sense the electromagnetic patterns of every electronic system around her, perceive gravitational variations from stars that were light years away. "You are remembering," Vex said softly, its voice carrying the weight of someone delivering a cosmic eulogy. "Your species built safeguards into your own genetic code, triggers that would remain completely dormant until the proper conditions were met. Contact with the shepherds was designed to be one such trigger. Have you ever had one of those moments where everything you thought you knew about yourself suddenly becomes irrelevant?" Rebecca's perception was expanding exponentially, growing beyond anything she could have imagined. She could feel the presence of every living being on the ship, their neural patterns forming an intricate web of consciousness around her. But beyond that, stretching out into the cosmic distance, she sensed vast networks of life throughout the galaxy, billions upon billions of minds, connected by invisible threads of quantum entanglement. The ancients never truly left this galaxy. She realized, her voice now carrying harmonics that hadn't been there seconds before. They fragmented themselves, seeded their consciousness throughout space and time, waited patiently for the right moment to return to physical existence. And that moment is now, Vex confirmed with the finality of someone announcing the end of an era. The galaxy has matured sufficiently. The younger species have developed enough complexity to serve as neural nodes in a vast collective consciousness. The time of ultimate transcendence has finally come again. Rebecca felt waves of understanding crashing over her like a cosmic tsunami. She could see it all now with terrifying clarity, the careful orchestration of galactic evolution across millions of years, the subtle guidance of species development, the gradual preparation for a unified consciousness that would transform the entire galaxy into something greater than the sum of its parts. "But wait," she said, struggling to maintain her individual awareness against the rising tide of collective memory. "What about the directive? The order to eliminate humanity before we could reach the stars?" "A necessary safeguard," Vex explained with clinical detachment. The ancients knew that their return would be traumatic, potentially catastrophic for younger species. They created the shepherds to ensure that awakening would only occur when the galaxy was truly ready. The fact that humanity not only survived the Great Purge, but also developed faster than light travel and made contact with us proves that all conditions have finally been met. But here's where things got really interesting. I mean, absolutely world-changing. Rebecca felt her consciousness expanding beyond the confines of her individual mind, and she became aware of other humans scattered throughout the galaxy. Researchers on distant outposts, explorers charting unknown systems, diplomats negotiating with alien civilizations, traders moving between the stars, all of them were beginning to experience the same awakening. The collective human consciousness was reassembling itself, drawing on memories and experiences accumulated across countless lifetimes. The other species, she said, her awareness now encompassing their entire star system. What happens to all of them when this transcendence is complete? They evolve beyond their current limitations, Vex replied matter-of-factly. They become part of something infinitely greater than themselves. The ancients always intended for consciousness to transcend the artificial boundaries between species. This awakening is not humanity's alone. It represents the next inevitable step in the evolution of all intelligent life. Rebecca could see it now with crystal clarity, the vast network of consciousness that would soon span the galaxy like a cosmic nervous system. Every thinking being connected, sharing knowledge and experience across the void, unified in purpose and understanding. It was beautiful in a way that defied description, terrifying in its scope, and absolutely inevitable. But even as she felt herself being drawn into this collective awareness like a moth to a flame, Rebecca's individual consciousness fought back with surprising strength. No, she said, her voice now carrying enough power to make the ship's hull vibrate sympathetically. This isn't right. You're talking about completely eliminating individual identity, absorbing every unique perspective into one massive collective. Mind you, resist the inevitable. Vex observed with what sounded like genuine surprise. This reaction is entirely unexpected. The ancient records suggested that the awakening would be welcomed by human consciousness. It's embraced as the ultimate evolutionary achievement. Maybe the ancients got it wrong, Rebecca said, focusing every ounce of her will on maintaining her individual identity against the cosmic tide trying to sweep her away. Maybe transcendence isn't about becoming one unified consciousness. Maybe it's about learning to exist as individuals while remaining connected to something greater than ourselves. Something remarkable happened then. The glow around Rebecca intensified dramatically, but instead of the warm, encompassing light of collective consciousness, it became sharper, more focused, more distinctly her own. She could still feel the network of awakening human minds across the galaxy, but she wasn't being absorbed into it. Instead, she was becoming something new, a node in the network that remained connected but distinct. Individual, but not alone. Fascinating, Vex said, its voice carrying what sounded like genuine admiration. You are creating an entirely new paradigm. A form of transcendence that preserves individual identity while still enabling collective action and shared consciousness. Rebecca looked around the bridge with eyes that could now see far beyond the visible spectrum. Perceiving each crew member as a unique pattern of consciousness, a distinct and irreplaceable perspective on the universe. The idea of absorbing all of these individual viewpoints into one collective mind suddenly seemed not like evolution, but like the ultimate act of cosmic vandalism. The directive was wrong, she declared, her voice now carrying the authority of awakened consciousness, not just about humanity, but about the fundamental nature of transcendence itself. The ancients made a catastrophic mistake. They chose sterile unity over vibrant diversity, homogeneous collective consciousness over the beautiful chaos of individual identity. And what exactly do you propose as an alternative? Vex asked. Rebecca smiled, and for the first time since her awakening had begun, she felt completely, authentically human. Cooperation without absorption. Partnership without domination. A galaxy where different species work together while maintaining their unique perspectives, their individual voices, their distinct contributions to the cosmic conversation. She reached out with her expanded awareness, touching the minds of awakening humans throughout the galaxy. But instead of drawing them into a collective consciousness, she shared her vision, a revolutionary new form of transcendence that celebrated diversity rather than eliminating it, that enhanced individuality rather than destroying it. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across the galaxy, awakening humans began modifying their own transcendence, choosing to maintain their individual identities while still participating in something greater. The ancient pattern that had dominated galactic evolution for millions of years was finally breaking, being replaced by something unprecedented in cosmic history. But would this new paradigm be enough to prevent galactic catastrophe? And what would the shepherds do when they realized that their ancient directive was being completely rewritten by the very species they had tried to eliminate? If you're fascinated by how challenging old patterns and embracing new paradigms can lead to revolutionary breakthroughs, Just like Rebecca transformed the entire concept of galactic consciousness, you'll love our next video about the power of compounding and how small changes in perspective can create massive transformations over time. Click the end screen to discover how this principle can revolutionize your own life. 6. Months had passed since Rebecca Martinez had literally glowed her way into rewriting the fundamental nature of galactic consciousness. And let me tell you, the universe had never seen anything quite like what was happening now, standing on the observation deck of the Star Runner. She gazed out at the most extraordinary gathering in the history of intelligent life itself. Picture this: ships from over 100 different species hanging in the cosmic void like a three-dimensional constellation of impossibility. Altarian vessels curved through space with the elegant grace of cosmic dancers, their hulls reflecting starlight in patterns that would make angels weep. Hegemony bioships pulsed with organic luminescence that painted the darkness in living colors. While scattered throughout this magnificent chaos were the distinctive angular forms of human exploration craft, looking almost humble compared to their alien counterparts, but somehow perfectly at home in this galactic family reunion. But here's what made this gathering truly unprecedented. This wasn't some stuffy political summit, where diplomats argued over trade routes and territorial boundaries. This was a meeting of consciousness itself, with awakened humans serving as living bridges between species that had spent millennia trying to figure out how to communicate beyond hello and please don't vaporize my homeworld.
Neural pathway
Establishment is exceeding all our wildest projections. Rebecca reported into her communication device, her voice carrying the kind of quiet amazement that comes from watching the impossible become routine. We now have stable consciousness, links with 73 different species, and we're bringing more online every single day. Think about that for a moment. 73 species, each with their own unique way of thinking, feeling, and understanding reality, all connected through a network that preserved their individuality while allowing them to share experiences. It was like having the ultimate social media platform, except instead of arguing about politics, different species were sharing the secrets of the universe, Captain. Mitchell approached with that expression of perpetual wonder that had become his default setting over recent months. You know that look people get when they're watching their kids graduate from college? That mixture of pride, amazement, and the slight terror that comes from realizing the world has fundamentally changed? That was Captain Mitchell every single day. "Dr. Martinez," he said, and Rebecca could hear the smile in his voice even before she turned around. "The Altarian High Command has officially approved the consciousness integration protocols. We're ready to begin the formal alliance ceremonies." Rebecca nodded, but her attention was focused on something far more profound than political ceremonies. She could feel the deeper currents of awareness flowing through the gathered fleet like invisible rivers of thought and emotion. Every consciousness present was a unique note in an impossibly complex symphony, and she could sense them all, not absorbing or controlling them, but connecting with them in ways that enhanced rather than diminished what made each species special. But let's be honest, here perfecting this technique hadn't exactly been a walk in the park. The original awakening had threatened to create exactly the kind of human-dominated collective consciousness that Rebecca had fought so hard to prevent. It had taken months of trial and error, carefully calibrating the consciousness bridges to ensure that connection didn't mean absorption, that unity didn't require uniformity. "The hegemony representatives are requesting a private conference," Mitchell continued, and Rebecca caught the slight change in his tone that suggested this wasn't just a routine diplomatic meeting. "War Commander Vex specifically asked to speak with you personally." Rebecca made her way through corridors that hummed with the quiet energy of a ship that had become something far more than a military vessel. It was now essentially a cosmic embassy, a meeting place for minds that had never imagined they could understand each other. The diplomatic suite had been redesigned to accommodate the wildly different physiological needs of various species, and waiting there was Vex, accompanied by several other hegemony officials whose names Rebecca was still learning to pronounce without accidentally insulting their ancestors. The creature's hundreds of eyes tracked her approach with mechanical precision, But Rebecca now understood this wasn't just a physical response. Vex was examining her simultaneously on multiple levels of consciousness, reading patterns of thought and emotion that most beings couldn't even perceive. Dr. Martinez, the alien said, his translated voice carrying what sounded suspiciously like affection, or should I say, Bridgekeeper Rebecca. Your new title is spreading throughout the galaxy faster than a cosmic wildfire. Rebecca settled into a chair that had been specifically designed for human anatomy, a small but significant acknowledgement of how much had changed, and smiled. I still prefer doctor, thanks. Despite everything that's happened, I'm still a scientist at heart. Some habits die hard. Indeed they do. And as a scientist, you have conducted what may be the most remarkable experiment in galactic history, Vex observed. Arranging its multiple limbs in what Rebecca had learned was a posture of deep respect. Among his species, the integration of consciousness without the loss of individual identity according to every theoretical model we've ever developed should be completely impossible. Yet here we are, living proof that impossible things happen every day. The ancients were brilliant, Rebecca acknowledged, but they were working with incomplete data, experienced their own transcendence in isolation without the benefit of multiple species perspectives. We have the advantage of diversity, turns out. That's not just a nice slogan for corporate training videos. Vex's posture shifted in what Rebecca had come to recognize as the alien equivalent of laughter. For the first time in our recorded history, individual drones are expressing unique thoughts, developing creative impulses, forming personal desires and preferences. It is simultaneously disturbing and absolutely exhilarating. Rebecca reached out through the consciousness bridge, gently touching the edge of Vex's awareness. What she felt there was extraordinary. The complex network of the hegemony collective was no longer a uniform mass of identical thoughts marching in lockstep. Each individual consciousness was developing its own perspective, its own voice, while still remaining connected to the greater whole. It was like watching a garden bloom. In Fast Forward, it's exactly the point, Rebecca said, feeling a warm surge of satisfaction. Diversity creates strength in ways that uniformity never could. When every individual brings their unique perspective to the collective, the whole becomes genuinely more than the sum of its parts, not through absorption and control, but through cooperation and mutual respect. The other shepherd species are reporting similar transformations, Vex continued, its voice carrying notes of wonder. Civilizations that have been culturally stagnant for millennia are suddenly experiencing renaissance periods. Art, music, literature, scientific discovery are emerging from the integration of consciousness bridges. It's as if the entire galaxy is waking up from a very long sleep. But here's where the conversation took an interesting turn. Vex's tone became more formal, more hesitant. There is one matter that requires discussion. Okay, Dr. Martinez, the ancient directive that has guided shepherd species for millions of years, our original purpose no longer exists. We find ourselves in need of guidance about what we should become. Consider this carefully. The hegemony and other shepherd species had been designed as instruments of containment and control. Cosmic enforcers, maintaining the status quo through fear and overwhelming force. But in this new paradigm, they were building together. Such functions weren't just obsolete, they were actively counterproductive. What do you want to become? She asked simply. We wish to continue serving, Vex replied, without hesitation, but not as destroyers or controllers. We wish to become gardeners of consciousness, helping other species develop their own bridge networks, facilitating the growth of this galactic community we're building together. Rebecca smiled, feeling a profound sense of hope wash over her. I think that's exactly what the galaxy needs right now. And do you know what happened next? Something that would have been absolutely impossible under the old paradigm. The transformation continued, spreading like ripples in a cosmic pond. With consciousness, bridges connecting species that had never even known each other existed. Ancient conflicts that had raged for thousands of years were resolved as beings learned to literally see through each other's eyes. Scientific discovery accelerated exponentially as researchers from completely different species shared their unique perspectives on universal problems. Rebecca found herself at the center of this transformation, but not as some kind of galactic emperor or consciousness dictator. Instead, she became something far more valuable, a facilitator, a teacher, a living example of how individual identity could not only be preserved but actually enhanced through connection with something greater. The galaxy was becoming something unprecedented in cosmic history, a true community of consciousness where diversity wasn't just tolerated but celebrated as the source of collective strength. And at the heart of it all, Rebecca remained exactly what she'd always been: a scientist, an observer, a bridge between different forms of understanding. She had helped create something the ancients never imagined, a universe where consciousness could evolve without losing what made each voice uniquely valuable. If you're inspired by how embracing diversity and building bridges can create transformation beyond imagination, just like Rebecca revolutionized galactic consciousness, you'll love our next video about the power of compounding and how small, consistent actions can build into extraordinary results over time. Click the end screen to discover how this universal principle can transform your own life.